saying that you guys don't want children. Why?
This young lady's video is very good, and she asks a legitimate question. I'm probably not who she wants to hear from in that I'm like twice her age, but I'm going to answer this question for her and anybody else who wants to listen in. I will go into the finances of it first, so for those of you who follow me for the finance side of things, let's talk about that first. There is a challenge that men in general right now, not just younger men, but men in general all over the West right now in the English-speaking world are having, and that is being able to find some kind of way to make enough of a living to be able to afford that kind of life. That kind of life has been, for the most part, exported to other countries, to China, India, and other countries, respectively. And that used to not be the case. We want to protect it. We want to protect that. But sadly, what happened was that, well, a bunch of people have invested in all these giant companies, and these giant companies have to have progressively cheaper and cheaper and cheaper labor in order to maintain their stock prices, and thus, of course, maintain the perceived value for the retirements for all of these boomers who won't let everything collapse like it's supposed to, and it should have in 2008. So, while I may get a little technical here and there, I am actually answering your question because you ask a really good one, and I don't think you're alone on this. You also have the real estate aspect that, once again, I mean, there are many men out there who absolutely, I promise you this, I promise you, Joe, there are probably millions of men who would love to live kind of out in the county somewhere, you know, on a dirt road or something behind a bunch of trees and brush and have like a little farm. Like, there are millions of men who would absolutely love that. And the cost of that has gotten so crazy, once again, because of the idea of the so-called investment property, which is a terrible idea. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the investment property has actually done more damage to birth rates in the US than feminism. And feminism, no question, has done a lot of damage to birth rates. There's just no question about that. It's done a lot. I mean, when you look at the birth rate, which is 1.64 last time I checked, and replacement is 2.1. So, yeah, it's done a lot of damage. And I would say that aspect of not being able to actually find a place to live and be able to build a house or something like that and build a farmstead like you talk about, that's becoming more and more out of reach. Now, granted, there are some young men out there who are just lazy and don't want to do any of that. True story, absolutely. But there are millions who would love to do something like that. They either don't have necessarily the skills to do that because they were never taught that stuff, right? I mean, like, remember, you're too young to remember this, but back like when I was a kid, right, they had shop class, right? I mean, if you go back and watch like, I mean, I hate to say it like this, but man, go back and watch like the old King of the Hill episodes, like the first, whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 seasons of King of the Hill. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, there's that Hank Hill character that embodies what a lot of, older men, okay, those of us in Gen X, okay, those of us that are beekeeping age, that we remember all that stuff, right? We remember doing all of this stuff. Like, we know how to make a compound miter, like we know how to do these kinds of and put stuff together. Well, that wasn't really well taught to a lot of the younger men because unfortunately, if you teach them that kind of stuff, that doesn't fit the replacement aspect, which is what's going on. I mean, keep in mind, governments, and this is where I'm going to get to the government aspect of this, governments don't want strong, self-sufficient young men. That's the bane of their existence. They're trying to get rid of that. It's sort of like, why don't ladybugs eradicate aphids? Because they know if they eradicate the aphids, then they'll lose their cheap, easy food source. Okay, well, governments don't need to. They can't eradicate their populations, right? They have to replace them with a more docile and easy to control population. In other words, the young man that you're looking for, Joe, that young man existed like 40 years ago. For real. I mean, that was the guy that was like, yep, I'm all over it, and let's do this. That was 35, 40 years ago when those men existed. And what you have now are guys who want that, but they were never shown how to do any of that stuff. Now, Now that I've touched on all the finance aspect and the practical reality of it, let's touch on the other side of this. And this is the part that a lot of the men, if there's any men watching this at this point, most people statistically never watch these videos that I do this long. But if there's any men that are still left, they'll all say, get to the family courts. Yes, that's where I'm going next. And that is with the aspect of what government has turned into. Look at what we have right now. We have a government that is, like, we have people in government hunting down other people on their game preserves and then euthanizing their pets because we have all kinds of free time for that, apparently, right? And it wasn't just one agency or some rogue agent. No, this was like 4 or 5 agencies, a sitting judge, and on that did all of this with Peanut the squirrel. Now imagine that you're a young man who's like 24, 25, and that type of crazy system is coming after you. And there's no one you can talk to. There's no one you can explain anything to. There's no one you can reason with, because reason can be met with reason. Reason cannot be met with stupidity. Okay? I mean, in other words, if you're dealing with crazy people who, like, they don't care about what your situation is. They know that they're being paid a bunch of money to go and euthanize squirrels. That's all they care about. They care about their paycheck. When you're the squirrel, right? I mean, I'm likening this. I mean, because there is a correlation. Because I know many young men that have had this kind of thing happen, where they just, the government just gets a hold of them and they just ruin their lives. On top of them never being able to see their kids again in the event of a divorce or something like that. Now, your body language doesn't betray you and say that, oh, that you're some crazy woman who wants, you're probably like a 5 on the crazy scale. So I mean, I consider you pretty mellow just from what I can see in your video. Again, I don't know you personally, but I'm pointing out that, like, most men kind of see this and they go, oh, okay, well, but what if she's angry with me, and then what if all of her friends, because you usually end up having to, unfortunately, kind of judge women by the company they keep, because if their friends are crazy, then, like, you have to put that into your data points, right? And men do all this subconsciously. They do a cost-benefit analysis, and they go, man, there's just no way. I can't afford that. Like, so Elon Musk, for example, can afford to have 11 kids with like 7 different baby mamas or whatever it is. Like, well, yeah, he can afford that. He's Elon Musk. He can just throw $1 billion here and there, and they're all fine. Most of the young men don't have anywhere even close to that. A median household income is just under $80,000, and that's with 2 people working, oftentimes full-time plus nowadays. So when we factor all of this stuff together, everything I just talked about, the finances and everything else, and even if you were willing to say, no, I'll live in a super tiny house that doesn't even have running water or something like that, yeah, then you have to worry about CPS hunting you, as they're finding out in the Carolina, in the hurricane-affected area right now in North Carolina, and so on, right? I mean, like, this is the problem, okay? And it's because all of this stuff is working together, and it's all creating a lot of angst and animosity, flat-out hatred that you're getting with young men towards the system, and it's long overdue as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I mean, like, this is going to have to kind of run its course until this is over with. Unfortunately, for women, you're right. You don't have that kind of time. You can't wait around another 20 years for men to get their shit together, so to speak, and eradicate their government that's caused all these problems. To my knowledge, I think like me and like one other person has ever talked about this issue that bluntly and point out that, like, yeah, I mean, it's really coming down, guys, young men, and those of us out here, middle-aged men, like, dude, yeah, it truly is coming down to us or them. And unfortunately, there's not many people who will approach it like that, but it's the truth. So I hope I was able to answer your question, Joe, to the best of my ability, but there's a lot of factors there, and I'm not 100%. There are other men that will give you other opinions. That's just what I'm seeing. It's a combination of all of this, and it's really horrible.